Harold, can you hear me?
I can hear you fine, Jared, all the way from around the world.
Perfect. So I would just like to welcome everyone to Pride in the Living Room, Jewmos edition. A quick reminder, Pride in the Living Room was founded by Israeli LGBT task force Agudah in memory of the 2009 Tel Aviv gay center shooting and the Jerusalem Pride Parade stabbing in 2015. And this project arose from the need to share LGBT Jewish stories, to encourage empathy and community. And without further ado, I would like to welcome Harold to the stage. So, Harold, how are you going on this Wednesday evening?
I'm fine. I'm fine. It's relatively late here in New York City. I've had a busy day, but I am glad to participate in this program, and I will happy to share my story and answer any questions you have, Jared.
Sure. Well, I thought that we might start at the very beginning. So, you are Jewish and you're also gay.
Both of those things are true.
I just wanted to ask, can you talk us through your Jewish upbringing?
Sure. I grew up in one of the nice suburbs of New York City in a family that was practicing reform. We went to a reform synagogue nearby. This was in the 70s, 60s and 70s. So, of course, the rabbi was a man, the cantor was a man. There was no real role, even in Reform Judaism, for women, much less gay people. My bar mitzvah was in May of 1970, which was not even a year past Stonewall. So the concept of the modern gay rights movement really was, there was no such thing. And as far as I knew, it's funny thinking back. Did I think I was gay? Did I think I was different? I thought I was different, and I think that probably by the time I was 14 or so, I realized that I was gay. But there was no such thing that I knew of. There was no gay synagogue. There were no gay Jews. There was no gay marriage. Um, there were some guys who were roommates, and in retrospect, both of my art teachers were gay, one a gay man and one a lesbian, who sort of took me under their wing. And I think that when I look back, for one of the first times that in retrospect I was with gay people, was they had somehow talked to my mother or me and said, how would you like it to, can we take Harold into New York City for the day? And my mother said to, I don't know, they asked my mother, and we arranged it. And so I met them in New York City. We went to the museum, and we went out to lunch, and we went shopping. And I think that the guy lived down in Greenwich Village. And, I never met gay people. In retrospect, he was gay. He was living in Greenwich Village, in what would probably be some very cool apartment. And I'd love to go back and redo that day. But it really wasn't until years and years and years later that I said, wait a second, she was a lesbian, he was gay. They looked at me as sort of some proto-gay kid and took me under their wing and took me to New York City. So I had a bar mitzvah. I learned some Hebrew. Reform Judaism in the 1970s in the US was not all that exciting. It was before Debbie Friedman. It was before more exciting singing. It was before the summer camp movement. It was before there were women clergy. So, I had my bar mitzvah. I learned some Hebrew. I did a little drosh. I went to confirmation class, and that was kind of it. I went off to college. I went to Yale in New Haven. There was an active Hillel that I never set foot in. I was not really interested at all in any organized Jewish things on campus, even though I would say that probably a quarter of the students were Jewish, but much more culturally Jewish than observant. At that point, when I was in college in the 70s, there just wasn't the sort of inspirational, spiritual Jewish practice that there is now. I went home. We had Rosh Hashanah dinner with family. We wouldn't miss the Passover Seder. We'd have Rosh Hashanah dinner. We'd do Hanukkah, and we'd light the menorah, but it wasn't really connected to much of a larger Jewish community or Jewish practice.
Hmm. Thank you for talking through that for us. Do you remember when, or maybe in retrospect, can you pinpoint the first inklings of your gay identity and how that manifested?
I think that I was one of those people who always had some inkling that I was different. But when you grow up, I mean, this was in the New York suburbs. It's totally different now. I am sure that my middle school has an LGBT, has a gay straight alliance, and my high school does something. And I have been back to my synagogue, and there is a rainbow flag on their website. And they would readily do a gay marriage. They would hire gay clergy. I'm sure they have support for the gay kids there. But it just, there were homosexuals, there weren't really gay people, and they were other people. And I remember when I was 14 in 1970, picking up a copy of Everything You Wanted to Know About Sex, but were afraid to ask, and sort of going in the back in that dark room and flipping to the pages about the homosexual. And it was awful. It was, gay people prey on children. Gay people are never able to have long and fulfilling relationships. Gay people have furtive sex in restrooms. Gay people are subject to blackmail. And I thought, this really? I thought that's awful. I said, is that the life? And I couldn't square it. I said, that does not have anything to do with my wanting to hold little Billy's hand, as we're walking home from school. But, there was just no model that you could look at of either happy gay adults or certainly there was no model of gay teens or preteens. And so you think, well, maybe I'm bisexual. Maybe I can make it work. So, I suppose I had sex when I was 16 with a high school friend, and it was a lot of fun, but nobody quite knew, what did it mean? Are you supposed to then go out on a date? You couldn't tell anybody. It wasn't as if, how old are you, Jared?
I'm 26.
Okay, and I'm 63. And this was in the 1970s. You grew up, hopefully, thinking that, oh, gay people can have fulfilling relationships. I can have a boyfriend and we can tell people that we're boyfriends and we can move in and we'll be that cute gay couple on the block and we can have a fun brunch and I can be gay at work and I can belong to a political organization and I can be gay at my synagogue. Some degree of this. None of that existed. You sort of had to figure it all out for yourself. And I went to Yale, and after I left, it turned into a school that was very supportive of gay people. But somehow the 70s were just like this slack time. There were some gay people there that I knew were gay. Certainly there was a growing feeling that there were gay people somewhere else. There were gay people in New York City. There was a gay alliance that I went to once and never went back to. I went to the mental health services and sat down with a very nice counselor and said, well, I'm gay. And she said, okay. She said, well, is there anything that's wrong? Are you okay with that? I'm like, well, I guess so. She said, so you're gay. Just, your job is to find a way to lead a fulfilling life as a gay person. We don't try to change. She was very, I don't know if this was where mental health professionals were at that point, or whether she was just particularly accepting. She said, we're not going to try to change you. There's no pill that you can take. And it really wasn't until I was a senior in college that I had my first relationship with a guy. And it was fun. And he was a younger student. And we enjoyed each other's company. But again, we couldn't figure out, once you've slept with one another, furtively, and don't tell anybody, and he didn't want anybody to know, and I'm not sure that I wanted anybody to know, where do you go with that? You could go to dinner. There was no model of, for me, well, this is what it would mean to be a gay man with a fulfilling adult gay life. And then I moved to New York City. I would say that part of the reason I moved to New York City was that I wanted to see what it was like to be a gay person here in New York City. And I remember my senior year in college, a friend of mine who later, of course, turns out to be a lesbian, and I decided that we weren't going to our prom, but we were going to drive into New York and try to get into Studio 54. This was when Studio 54 had first opened. So we drive down and we go to a friend's apartment and we get changed, and the taxi drops us off. And like this, I don't know what it was, like this. They were this was the first club with that very restrictive door policy that like nobody got in. So we were in, and all of a sudden I'm at like the throbbing heart of like, I don't know if it was gay life, but it was certainly the fun. This was 1978, fun in New York. And the waiters, the bus boys had little red satin shorts, and they were doing coke up in the balcony. And I looked at it, I said, I am moving to New York City. So I moved to New York City. I started work at Bloomingdale's, the department store, where I did meet gay people, where there were gay people, and I made my first gay friends and my first New York friends. And we had fun. I think small f fun. We had a good time. You could have had capital F, a lot of capital F fun in New York City, but I didn't have all the capital F fun. We went to the bars and we went to dancing, and it was pre-cell phones or internet. So if you wanted to meet somebody, you just went out and met them, and developed a circle of gay friends that was fun. And realized that you could have, and this was a point at which there was a gay pride parade and there were nascent gay organizations. I was not particularly political, but when you hear 1978, you think, oh, let's see, how many years before AIDS strikes New York City? So I moved there in 1978, and of course in, 1983, 1984, you started hearing about what was first called the gay cancer, and then was called GRID, and then was called AIDS. So I had friends who said you should be a little more, you should be a little sluttier. You should have a little bit more fun. You should just go to the bar and go home with somebody. And they're all gone. Because I was a little more reticent about that, I'm still here. Because the generation before me lost everybody. In my generation, I lost 6 close friends. It was sort of like one after the other after the other. There was about 10 years during which someone was either sick, not looking well, sick, in and out of the hospital, or dying. And it really, changed everybody's life. But I think it made the gay community a lot more political, because it wasn't just leave us alone and we're going to party and have a good time. It was, we want access to medical care, we want health care. And then it became obvious for all of the instances of people being told that they couldn't go to their lover's hospital room, or a lover dying and the parents showing up and claiming they did not know who that guy in the apartment was, and saying, the apartment is ours now and you have 24 hours to leave. And if you take anything of our son's, we will call the police because you will be stealing it. That happened. People who died and the parents whisked the body away and you never heard, it was all over. So people really started fighting for legal rights. I think it wasn't marriage at that point, but it was some sort of legal recognition of gay people and gay relationships and gay property rights and other things like that. Cheerful story, right?
It's a true story. It's important.
It is a true story, and I think that it's the story of a lot of people my age. I wasn't an ACT UP member, but I certainly knew about ACT UP. And then in 1990, I started my own business. And very shortly after that, let's see, I started my own business, and not that long after that, someone said, there's going to be something called the Gay Games in New York City. And I said, oh. And they said, and my friend is going to be the executive director, and I have a marketing consulting business. And they said, he's not quite sure what to do about selling T-shirts and things. We thought you might be able to help him. So I went and met with him, and we hit it off. And I turned out to be the fourth organizer for the Gay Games in New York in 1994, and wound up being in the right place at the right time, and not just doing the T-shirts. I wound up doing our whole licensing program, and then did all our corporate sponsorship, and then did all of our, we had a big, have you ever been to the games? There was a big exhibitor hall, and I did all the space rental for that. And it really took off. I was number 4, and I think that by the time of the games we had, was it 16,000 athletes? And New York in June of 1994 was Stonewall 25 and the gay games, and it was just cracked open. And every place you went, there were rainbow flags. And it was really, AIDS was still, in 1994, AIDS was still a big problem, but we had somehow rallied the community for a show of joy and accomplishment. And it was amazing. So I did that. And from that, I sort of got to know a lot of the people who were doing other gay organizing. And a lot of, so I'll back up a little, in 1993, 1987 was the first big March on Washington for LGBT rights. And then in 1993, there was another one. And so we went down there to promote the games, and to be in Washington, D.C., and just to stand at the Metro in DuPont Circle and watch the gay people just streaming up. You never knew there were so many gay people in your life. And we were handing out stickers for the gay games. We just said, take a sticker, take a sticker, take a sticker. And it was just so much, and everybody said, oh, this is great, the gay games. A lot of organizations that are politically significant now were founded sort of in that 87, 93 timeframe. So I did that. And then it turned out that it was sort of the start of gay marketing. So Out Magazine started, The Advocate magazine changed. So I wound up knowing all the people who were running the publications and running the organizations. And the gay games ended, and then I got a call from someone who is still a very close friend, Mike Smith, who had been the co-founder of the AIDS Memorial Quilt. And he said, the AIDS quilt is going to Washington, D.C. in 1996, and we need a sponsorship person. Can you do the sponsorship for us? And I said, sure. So I met with him, and I flew out to San Francisco where they were based and spent over a year doing the sponsorship for the gay games. And we were able to raise 1/3 of the money that paid for that display. That was the last complete display of the AIDS quilt. It took the entire mall in Washington, D.C., from the Washington Monument to the Capitol. It was 3 days. It was just amazing. And I put together this whole consortium of pharmaceutical sponsorship. And it turned out that 1996 was the year that everything changed, the year of the first protease inhibitors, where it was like the Lazarus effect. People who had been on their deathbed started taking medication that enabled them to get back to life. So I did that, and then came back to New York, did a lot more corporate sponsorship stuff, and then when I was doing the AIDS quilt sponsorship, I met the people from a pharmaceutical company, which was then SmithKline Beecham, which became GlaxoSmithKline, and they wound up hiring me to promote hepatitis vaccination to gay and bisexual men around the country. And that wound up being a 15-year assignment. So I went all over the country working with departments of public health, gay clinics, gay activists, the media, the CDC, promoting hepatitis vaccination, and wound up with a program called Hep Team that we took. I think we probably went to about 120 gay pride festivals over the course of the time I did it. Most Fridays, I was on my way to the airport to fly someplace to set up a big tent with my Hep Team and talk to gay and bisexual men about hepatitis vaccination, and it was really successful. We had a vaccine, a vaccine has huge, everyone's talking about the vaccine now for COVID and how when we get it, it will change things. Well, this was like that we finally had a vaccine for hepatitis, which really had been a rampant problem in the gay community. And little by little, we got people vaccinated so that when is the last time you heard of anybody who had hepatitis? It's almost a thing of the past, thanks to this vaccination program.
It's really inspirational to hear you talk about your journey through your sponsorship work in the gay space, and how the AIDS crisis really changed what the gay community was, becoming more political. Um, and I've heard so much about the AIDS quilt, and it's really beautiful to hear you talk about your own personal role in that story. So thank you for sharing all of those elements.
You're welcome.
Uh,
So back
so
to the Jewish journey then, because we're trying to match the gay and the Jewish stuff.
sure, go ahead.
So I thought I was let me back up, that I said I went to college, never went to Hillel, and then sort of went to my family for Jewish events. And then once I established myself a little bit more in New York City, I figured, oh, I should go to high holiday services. So there were high holiday services offered by the Reform Movement down at Hebrew Union, the campus of Hebrew Union College. And I and some of my other sort of 20-something friends would go to these services every year. And every year I would say, you know what, maybe I should explore Judaism just a little more and go to some service other than a high holiday service. And I never did it. I would go to, bar and bat mitzvah. The only time I was in a synagogue was bar and bat mitzvahs, weddings, or funerals. But something in the back of my mind said, well, maybe you should learn Hebrew. Maybe you should explore this more. But I really just didn't, it just really wasn't pulling to me. And I knew there was a gay synagogue in New York. And people said to me, they have these amazing services at the Javits Center, which is our big convention center. And so one year I went, and it must have been about 25 or 26 years ago. It must have been in the 90s sometime. And a lot of people at this synagogue, Congregation Beit Simchat Torah, where I'm now on the executive committee, a board member, very active, and the secretary, say, I first went when I heard about these amazing free high holiday services. I don't know what it's like where you are, but in New York City, if you want to go to a synagogue's high holiday services, you need to be a member of the synagogue and pay or buy tickets. Now, I know now that there are free tickets for 20-somethings and people recently out of college. I didn't realize that now. So when someone said, well, there's a gay synagogue and the services are free and open to all, I said, hey, I should check this out. So I don't remember going the first time, but that became part of my life, part of my year, was going to the big free services in the Javits Center. We have 4,000 or 5,000 people who come to our services, loving it and saying, I'm going to do something else besides doing this. And then another year went by and I didn't do anything. And I can't tell you how many times I must have sat down with, that New Year's resolution list or the list of things I'm going to accomplish this year and said, I should learn some more Hebrew and I should try services. And I never did it. And then one year, I was at the rabbi's, in the break between morning and afternoon services on Yom Kippur, the rabbi has a little circle for sort of talk to the rabbi, newcomers, non-members, first-timers. So I introduced myself and I said to the rabbi, I am promising you that I am, and I really didn't know her, Rabbi Kleinbaum at that point. I said, I'm promising you that I'm going to go to some services between now and next year and explore what's available outside of the high holidays. And she said, that's great. Why don't you do that? And so I talked to a friend of mine, a straight woman, who also had felt the same thing. And we said, let's go shul shopping. So in New York City, there's such a wealth of Jewish life that there's Reform, conservative, modern Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox. There's Chabad, there's renewal, there's reconstructions, there's uptown, downtown, there's singing, there's dancing, there's everything you want. So we made a list of places we thought we would like to go, and we went to them. And every Friday we went to a different synagogue. And we went to Central Synagogue, which is the big Reform synagogue, which is literally, Jared, 3 blocks from my house, on the same street, 3 blocks. And I must have walked by there 1,000 times without ever really looking at it. And then I went in thinking, because it's so fancy, that it must be a conservative synagogue. And it turned out that it was a Reform synagogue, and they had amazing singing and music. And this was not the Reform synagogue that I had had my bar mitzvah in. So when my friend called me and said, where should we go next Friday? I said, I think I found my place. I said, I'm going to go back to Central Synagogue for a while. So I went, and I was that guy, and a lot of people have been that guy who sat in the back and didn't really know the Hebrew, but sort of got a little more familiar with using the prayer book and got to know the clergy on sort of a, they would say hello basis, and a few people that I sat with. And I kept on going, and it really started to mean something to me. And one day so there was one of the rabbis who I would look at and say, I bet I could talk to him. So I called and said, I'd like to make an appointment and talk to Rabbi Michael Friedman. And the secretary said, is this about something in particular? I said, no, I would just like to come and talk to him. I spent this life-changing, amazing hour with the rabbi and had all these questions just completely spilled out that I had always had about being Jewish and Judaism and Jewish practice, and I had never asked anybody. And so at the end, I said, I really think I should learn Hebrew to do this a little better. And I said, how do you learn Hebrew? He said, well, this, that. I said, there may be a class here, there may be a class here. I said, well, how about a tutor? And he said, we have all these bar mitzvah tutors, and I'm sure they would be very happy to work with a willing adult rather than the 12-year-olds. So he gave me someone's name, Liz Wagner, and I called her, and she said, sure. So we spent 4 weeks during the summer, and we met once a week, and we went over the little Aleph bet book that she uses with the bar mitzvah kids. And she said that takes 4 months with the kids, but it took 4 weeks for me because I really wanted to do it. And I was sort of launched on a journey of learning Hebrew and wound up doing several years worth of online classes with the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And once you start learning Hebrew, it's like the window gets clean, the lights go on, the music becomes audible, and you start to understand the prayers, and you understand all of the other texts that you're supposed to be reading or that you can read. So it was like little by little, and then all of a sudden I was going to the services and I was going to classes. At the same time, my parents were getting on, and I thought, at a certain point, I'm going to need the support of a Jewish community because my parents are going to pass away. And my mother got sick, and my mother passed away. And it was Michael Friedman from Central Synagogue who came to the hospital room and was unbelievably supportive to me. And then the time after my mom passed away, I didn't even know that there was such a thing. I had heard there was such a thing as saying Kaddish for someone. I didn't really know what it meant. I didn't know whether you did it at home or where you did it or what happened. And so it turns out that there was a morning minyan at Central Synagogue. I had not known that there was a morning minyan. Or, when you look back, what did you know? What did you not know? I don't know. But I found out about it, and I went and I sat in the back and understood nothing. I had never been to a morning service. It was in Hebrew, it was in English. They changed it up from day to day. People were standing, people were sitting. But when you're in grief and shock, you really don't ask a lot of questions, you just go. So at first I thought, well, I'll say Kaddish once a week for my mother. I'll go one place or the other. And then I thought, well, maybe I'll go 2 days a week. And then it pretty quickly, as it happens for people saying Kaddish, that it just becomes part of your life. And at 8 o'clock every morning, you're there. And if you're there and listening, you learn the prayers and you learn what's going on and you become friendly with people. And I got friendly with the leaders and I said to them, can I redo the Siddur for you? I said, the Siddur is not at all friendly. I'm a marketing consultant and a communications person. I said, it doesn't work for someone like me who walks in and says, my father died last Thursday and I've never been to a minyan service. And they said, okay, have at it. So I spent 3 months and we went through 26 different drafts of where the Hebrew goes and where the English goes and how much translation and how much transliteration. And at the end, we wound up with a siddur that they're still using, and that was in 2012. And we made it, and I said to them, you need to use a siddur that people understand, and you need to be friendlier. Someone who walks into a morning minyan without having been there before is there because someone died. And you need to say to them, hi, how are you? May I ask why you're here? And I sort of became an advocate for a more welcoming form of Judaism. And then it's just like all the dominoes fell. So I started learning Hebrew, and then I figured out that I wanted to learn how to read Lane Torah. So I took a class, and this was almost like a miracle. I thought, I really want to learn how to Lane Torah, and I didn't know where to go. And so one day I open a copy of the Jewish Week, and out falls the brochure from Temple Emmanuel, the biggest Reform synagogue here in New York. And it opens to the page that says, do you want to learn how to read Torah? I was like, oh my God. So I called the number, and I wound up talking to the cantor at the biggest Jewish Reform synagogue. Really, if anyone who's been to New York has seen this synagogue on Fifth Avenue. And she turned out to be the sweetest, most generous, helpful person. She said, well, you missed the first class. This really is for people who took the first class. I said, I have to learn how to do this. She said, well, why don't you come in and we'll meet and we'll see if we can get you up to speed. So I'm not a member. She doesn't know me from Adam. So I go in, they have this huge office. There's a grand piano in the cantor's office. And she takes an hour and she just sits me down and she says, okay, do you read Torah? This is Mercha, Tipcha, Munach, et Nachta. And we did the one lesson. And she said, I think you'd benefit from one more lesson before we start the class. So she said, can you come in tomorrow? I said, fine. So I came in. I wound up going to her 4 times. She gave me individual tutorials for an hour. This is the cantor. I don't know what she saw in me. I don't know what was going on. But I started the class, and I did that class, and I did Haftarah cantillation. And I'm actually the only person, I think, from that class who did it all the time. But having done that, I then became a more active member at CBST, because you couldn't really, Central Synagogue, where I had become a member, is very fancy. And everyone, they don't just have members chant Torah. That's the cantor's job, or the bar mitzvah kid. But at CBST, they said, oh, anyone can chant Torah here. Just tell us what you want. Just sign up for a portion. So my story is going on and on. But at a certain point, I realized that I was a paid member that I needed to be, what was it? They called me from Central Synagogue. They have a waiting list for membership. And it's a year. And I'd gotten on the waiting list. I'd done all this not being a member. And they called me. They said, well, your number has come up. You can become a member now. And I said, oh, I want to think about it. They said, well, you have a month to think about it. They said, and if you say no, you go back to the bottom of the list. And now it's a 2-year waiting list. So I said yes to Central Synagogue. I really agonized. Should I say do Central Synagogue? Should I do the gay synagogue? Which one needs me more? Blah, blah, blah. So I belonged to Central Synagogue. And then they sent out an offer from CBST for $10 a month, $180 for 18 months to anyone who wasn't a member. And I said, oh, I'll join there too. So I had 2 memberships, and I was going back and forth between the 2 synagogues. And then I started going to this conservative synagogue near me, because they had a morning minyan that was really the one we did at Central Synagogue was sort of abbreviated. I'd learned enough about worship, and I had learned enough about Hebrew that the traditional service at a conservative synagogue made sense to me. So I wound up giving up my membership at Central Synagogue, where I'm still quite friendly with a lot of people, keeping my membership at CBST, and then becoming a member of the conservative synagogue near me, where I learned to lead the morning minyan and did it in rotation with a couple of other people, wound up going on the board there and being one of the people on their ritual committee. So I did that. And then CBST, we finally got a home of our own. We had these major services at the Javits Center, but we had a little space in the West Village that had no windows, and it was terrible acoustically, where they did the Shabbat morning services, and then the Friday evening services were at a church. But finally, we raised the money and we got a space of our own with a beautiful synagogue. And I realized that I was spending a lot of time there, and I was reading Torah and doing all sorts of volunteer work. So I gave up my other memberships for CBST, and in relatively short order, wound up becoming a very, very active volunteer and going on the board, and then becoming an executive committee member, and now the secretary of the board.
So you've spoken about your gay identity and your Jewish identity and the ways that you have engaged with those identities and taken on leadership roles within both. I just wanted to ask, what draws you to such active roles within those two spaces? And in your work, have you had to butt heads with people? And how do you process that?
So that is, I haven't talked about that yet, but I worked on the program for hepatitis, and then I got a call out of the blue by someone working with the consortium of Jewish genetic disease organizations. And they said, we need a marketing consultant to help us better get out the word about the need for genetic testing for Jewish genetic diseases. And can you help us? And I thought, well, it puts together the marketing part, the disease part, the Jewish part. And so I started working with them, I don't know, over 10 years ago, and totally redid their programs. And that has been my biggest client project now for over 10 years. We are in touch with every synagogue in the United States, with all of the OBGYNs, the primary care providers, and the genetic counselors. So my work involves working in the Jewish world, a lot of it with synagogues and Jewish leaders, about an important health issue regarding the Jewish community. It's not a gay issue, but it's a health issue. So that's what I do. My professional job is to work with synagogues and rabbis and patients and medical providers about this. And I have never, in 1980, so your question was, have I ever at work felt uncomfortable or been in a situation where being gay was difficult or awkward? Is that what you're saying? Was that your question? I want to make sure I understand your question right.
Yeah.
Okay. So yes, in 1987. And that was the last time. I was working for someone who, I was not really out at work, somewhat out at work. I mean, I'd been at Bloomingdale's where I was out at work and it was no problem. I worked for Godiva Chocolates, and there was a whole cadre of gay people, a lot of my gay friends there. And that wasn't a problem. And that was in 1980, actually that was in 1985. There wasn't a problem at Bloomingdale's, where my boss and my boss's boss were gay. It wasn't a problem at Godiva. I went to work for a Swiss watch company, where it was a difficult, relatively misogynistic male, straight guy world. I lasted there for 9 months. I don't know if it didn't work out because I was gay. I don't think so. It just was a bad fit. And I left that job and basically started my own company. And I have no need to work, and did gay marketing and gay sponsorship, and worked for a client that was promoting hepatitis vaccination to gay men. And certainly in the job my client worked now, nobody cares. I mean, nobody in New York who's hiring anybody, I think, would care whether they're gay or straight, as long as they can do the job.
There's something really interesting you mentioned when you were talking about your work revising the Siddur, and you said that it's important people use a Siddur that they understand. It's important that Judaism is welcoming for people, and I think taking that concept and applying it to other aspects of life, is I think that's a beautiful way to describe it. You know, when we enter into a space, we want the language to be presented in a way that relates to us, that we can identify with, in a way that feels welcoming. So I wanted to ask, as someone who has, in their professional career, worked in marketing, in sponsorship, in promotions, in finding a way to best tell and present a story to its intended audience, how do you how do you think that the Jewish spaces and the gay spaces that you currently inhabit, how are they at telling those stories and making their members feel welcome?
That's an interesting question. Rabbi Kleinbaum, the rabbi that I sat down with and said, you know, I'm going to go to synagogue between high holidays, is now one of my closest friends, spiritual mentor. She is, after 27 years, still the senior rabbi of the synagogue. And she and I have gotten arrested together, and we've gone to Israel together, and we text or message each other just about every day. She says, CBST makes Jewish people feel comfortable being gay and gay people comfortable feeling Jewish, because there are gay people who aren't necessarily comfortable in a synagogue or haven't felt as if they were, and gay people who aren't comfortable being outwardly Jewish. So to answer, how do you make people feel comfortable? That's an interesting question, because I've tried working with clients to make all sorts of places welcoming, and the synagogue to make people welcoming. And I don't think that I think I can tell you things like put up a rainbow flag and the gays will feel comfortable. I think you have to listen to people. I think you have to realize that everyone is on a different place in their journey, whether it's the gay journey or the Jewish journey, and meet them where they are and support them in the way that is right for them at that point. You know, if I had gone into a synagogue years earlier and someone said, oh, well, you should learn Hebrew and you should rewrite the Siddur and you should be going to morning minyan and you should be reading Torah, I'm like, dude, you know, get off of me. This is not where I'm at. I just wanted to go on a Friday and sing a little and meet some people. So we have, I hope I'm answering your question. We have now a welcoming committee. So what I say to every synagogue I've at, just say hello sincerely. Ask someone how they are and listen. Ask them what brought you to their synagogue and respect that. Don't try to correct them. I think that Judaism is not particularly welcoming. I think that it's a religion where our worship services are conducted in an ancient language that takes years to learn, with a million different things you can do wrong. When you stand, when you sit, how exactly you're supposed to wrap the tzitzit around your finger, whether you make a shin for a shaddai or not when you cover your eyes during the Shema, whether your feet, you know, I had a rabbi who once said to me after I was leading, I thought was a lovely morning minyan service that everybody liked, and I was mixing some English with the Hebrew and saying hello to people. He said, I want to talk to you about something at the service. And I thought, oh, he has some idea of how we can make people feel more welcome. He said, your toes are apart when you're saying the Kedusha. He said, your toes need to be together and you need to be going up on the ball of your feet. Otherwise, you are not replicating what the angels did when they said, Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. You need to do better with that. And I thought, you know what? You are not the right rabbi for me. I said, thank you very much. That's a very interesting thing to know. And it is true that there are people who will look at you, but there are people who think that the way they are protecting Judaism is by telling a mourner that telling someone who's not in mourning that they shouldn't stand up during the mourner's Kaddish, or tisk-tisking someone who says, well, I went on vacation and I did not take Shabbat candles with me. I think that the people who want to get to that level of Jewish observance should be certainly supported in it in every single way. But I don't think that everyone is going to get to that level. And there are wonderful, dedicated, spiritual Jewish people who have a different type of Judaism.
Hmm.
And you know, Jared, I have to say, I'm so rarely, if ever, I'm never in a non-gay friendly space, living in my little bubble here in New York City. So when you ask, how do you make spaces more friendly to gay people? I don't even think about that any longer, because every space that I choose to be in is friendly to gay people.
That's wonderful to hear. I'm sure that there are people who watch this video who may not have that luxury in their own spaces. So it's really beautiful to hear what works in the spaces that you inhabit. So maybe they can take a piece back home with them. I have one final question, if that's okay.
Sure, anything you want.
So I'd like to take a step all the way back to the beginning of your story,
Right,
when you were speaking about being a proto-gay and
right,
having this wonderful moment of self-identification with uh, people who you retrospectively saw as a lesbian and a gay man, and they took you
right.
shopping, and you had this wonderful experience. I just wanted to ask, I'm not sure if you've had the opportunity to speak with them about what that moment or what that experience meant to you. But if you were able to speak with them, what would you say?
That's such an interesting question, because I did reach out to the woman. I met her on Facebook and we corresponded a little, and she remembered me. And she did say, well, yes, I'm not sure that she must at this point be in her 80s. It became clear that, yes, I was right, that she was a lesbian and that he was a gay man. And we went back and forth a little, and I said something about remembering that time. And you know what? I didn't go there. I couldn't. Sometimes you don't really want to know, because what if she had said, I don't remember that at all? Or, no, you just said you wanted to go to the museum. And it wasn't, it was over email, and she was in Florida, and I would love to, and I never said anything to my mother. I never said, how did I wind up going to New York City with the two teachers? Sometimes your memory of something is so sweet and your interpretation of it works for you that you don't particularly want to query it, because in my understanding, and I believe this is true, that they looked at me and they said, he could benefit from an afternoon in New York City. Or you know what? Sometimes I don't know if you have any kids in your life. Sometimes you look at a kid and you're just like, you know what? We're gonna go for a bike ride. We're gonna go for a talk. You want to go sailing or something? And the kid says yes. And kids just need other adults to spend some time with them. I don't think that they said, we know that he's going to wind up gay and living in New York City, and we're going to be the first people to take him to the Museum of Modern Art and show him that that's what gay people are. They may have just wanted to, sometimes adults just want to form, and say there's a bigger world out there. I think that was part of it. I was living in a nice suburban commuter community, and I had bigger dreams for myself that far beyond just being an out gay man, which I couldn't put, where I want to see the world. I want to go to museums. I want to go shopping. I want to go to nice restaurants. And I think part of it was just that. Did you grow up in a city or in a town? What was your experience?
Well, this is your video, so I won't go too much into
So you don't need to
detail.
answer, but the idea of going into, when you're 14 years old and you're starting to feel a little bit more independent, the idea of going into the city with grown-ups who are seeing you as sort of a young adult, not a kid, who want to do adult things with you, was very, very attractive. And I think that is what that may would have been, it mostly was at that point. But in retrospect, I think that it was gay people looking at other people. I mean, sometimes you look at, but I will tell you, if I could tell you one more story. I was in Boston, and a very close friend of mine, Lee Goldberg, who I think you know, was asked to give the drash at his boyhood synagogue. And he gave the drash about coming out and about dealing with substance abuse problems, and now being a board member of a gay synagogue and being a philanthropist and working with UJA. And there was a young man sitting up he was like one of the musicians or something, with a nice little bow tie and a suit. And I looked at him, I said, that's the gay kid. And so afterwards, I'm talking to Lee, and this young man, Zach, comes over and starts talking to us, and his mom is standing there. And he says, oh, I want to know all about your synagogue. And his mother turns to us and says, well, because Zach is gay. And Zach came out, last year. He turns to his mom and said, Mom, I didn't come out last year. I came out 2 years ago when I was 13. And she says, okay. So he says, tell me about the synagogue. And his mother is like standing right there. And she says, Zach, she said, next time we're in New York, we should go to that synagogue. You should go to the gay synagogue. You should, meet more of these people. And I said, well, you can come for our gay pride services. You can march in the gay pride parade with us. He said, that would be great. His mom said, wow, that's really exciting. Zach, we can make that happen. Now, it didn't happen because of COVID and there was no gay pride, but the thought that you could be 16 years, here in 2020, at least in some places, there's a wonderful Jewish kid who came out at the age of 13 with the complete support of his parents and his synagogue, has an internship at his synagogue where they are very happy to have a gay teen, an out gay teen, as part of their leadership, their young adult leadership group. And, Zach's life is going to be different than my life. And it's just, I look at him and I think, well, isn't this great that there is real progress? Because that is me 50 years ago, but the world is totally changed. So that is my story of hope. The difference between my being 14 years old in a Reform synagogue in 1970 and Zach being 14 years old in a Reform synagogue in 2018, in terms of both understanding that there is a larger gay world that's waiting to welcome you, and a Jewish world which is happy to welcome out gay people.
That's so beautifully said. I think what I take away from your story is someone who has been through their own struggles, been through their own journey, and they've had contact points, people who reached out to them, people who supported them, and you've devoted your career, your vocation to paying it forward, to spreading awareness about important health issues, with helping create spaces that feel welcoming to their participants, and as you say, to help facilitate the environment for the next generation of Jewish gay kids, Jewish LGBT kids to grow up in. So all of that said, it is my pleasure to have spent this time with you, Harold. And thank you again for being a part of our Pride in the Living Room. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome, Jared. I am proud to be your friend and glad to help out with this, and think that this series may be another step in moving in progress, both in terms of the LGBT and the Jewish spheres. Thank you so much. All right.
Thank you.
Have a nice evening. Bye-bye.